Hello, this is the Torg Eternity Delphi Council Debriefings, where the storm has a name. We are your hosts, Lehman, Jay, and Mark, and we are going to dig into some emails that we have received. So, if you want to email us, you can at torgdcd@gmail.com. And then, like today, we will read your emails, and if you have questions, we will answer your questions. We will also, when we're able to, we'll tell you what is official, as well as any house rules or interpretations that are a little different, so you can tailor the answers to your own group and use what is best in your own Cosmverse. So we'll just dive into the first email. The first email says, "Hi guys, thanks for keeping the fire lit. I'm really enjoying the debriefings. This may have been asked already, so if so, apologies, but each cosm book gives us the special properties of possibility energy in that cosm, with the exception of core Earth. What are the special properties of core Earth possibilities? On that note, do cosm natives refill with that cosmos possibilities in between acts?" So I'll just state, as for core Earth possibilities, we do plan to have a core Earth source book, and that is where we would list... Hold on. I got some weird crap going on.
I think the cat just activated something.
Yeah, the cat was bumping your mic. That's
that's what happens when when either your cat or something hears you and decides to start talking. Okay, so let's get back. So talking about core Earth possibilities, we do plan to have a core Earth source book instead of having a High Lord in it, and what the High Lord's plans are, because there are no High Lord, there is not a High Lord of core Earth. We'll deal with the Delphi Council. Right. And then in that is where we'll have the core Earth possibilities. On the question do the Cosm natives refill with that Cosm's possibilities? So reality rated, our Ords don't really have a full possibility. They have possibility energy, but it would not be necessarily core Earth possibility energy or Isle possibility. There is the generic possibility, and that's what the majority of things are. The special cosm or reality possibilities, whatever you wish to call that category, those are specific for when you do things that are in the spirit or nature of that reality. So when Ords or others just refill, like Storm Knights at the end of the act, they can choose to keep the possibilities that are from others, but the generic possibilities, that's what is the majority of possibility energy out there. So hopefully that explains those questions there. And thank you for listening. That's why we're doing these, is to keep everybody informed about Torg Eternity and talk and discuss and keep the fires going. So let's move on to the next email. So the next one says, you touched on melee generally in your DCD, and that was one of the brief debriefings, I believe. Can you compare that to gunfighting in your next DCD? It might help bring out the contrast. So for this, basically what he was talking about is that when I discussed melee, I said the defense is based off of what the defender has. So if you're in close combat and you're being attacked by somebody with fists or claws, if you have a melee weapon, your defense is still melee weapons. It's not unarmed attack because you have a melee weapon. Conversely, if you are using your fist to defend and the other guy has a sword, then you are going to use your unarmed combat as a defense, not melee weapons. So that's how that works. And then, of course, if you get disarmed or something, you're using melee, or sorry, you're using unarmed. So hopefully that kind of gets the melee part. So let's talk about, it says gunfighting, but we're going to expand that to talk about ranged. So there's multiple ranged skills. There are melee weapons, or sorry, missile weapons. Man, my brain. Missile weapons. Missile weapons are any thrown or bow type weapons, crossbows, bows, thrown, and that can be anything from throwing a rock, throwing a spear, throwing a grenade, throwing potions. All of that is under missiles. And then you have fire combat, which it would be firearms or projectiles from firearms, all the way up to some Tech 26 things have those. Then there is energy weapons, and energy would be, most people would think that they would look somewhat like firearms for the fire combat, but energy weapons is just lasers, plasma, stuff like that, future tech. And then there is heavy weapons, which would be anything from law rockets to shooting missiles from some type of missile system to C4 explosives. Anything like that would be under heavy weapons. That's where you kind of get into demolitions as well. So any thoughts, Jay, on other things about the gunfighting?
I guess the biggest thing about ranged attacks versus the unarmed defense is that the defense is very simple. It's always dodge, right? So it's always against dodge. Whether it's a blast area or not, it's pretty much always dodge. There might be some spells and things that would work differently, but as far as firearms, bows, and energy weapons, it's pretty much always dodge. The thing you gotta watch for is that certain things will only apply to certain other things. Like, normally, if you have a shield, you count as a melee character for defense if it's in close quarters, but having a shield, if you're being shot at, is still dodge, but you do still get the bonus to defense from the shield.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are some types of equipment like diffracts, which will add to your defense as well as also adding to your toughness from being armor. So you do have to kind of watch for those sorts of things. A lot of the modifiers are similar for ranged attacks versus melee attacks, but a lot of the ranged ones, like aiming, takes time. There's a few differences, but overall, you're just always going against dodge.
Mark, you had talked about you wanted to bring in firing into combat, I believe. Firing into melee, that rule.
That seems to be one of the most, I don't want to say controversial, but most uniquely played rules in the game system is that you can go play in 10 different tables and you'll find 5 to 10 different ways that firing into melee is handled. I guess the rules as written, you just look at the die roll and determine whether or not you've got a chance at hitting somebody that's friendly if they're in melee, right? We play it a little bit differently.
And that would be after any possibilities or ups or anything like that.
Yes, yeah. Once you've got a final number. And not the bonus number, but the die roll. And see, this is the complication this is why I do it differently, because this adds a level of complication that gets forgotten on, or that you'd get down the road and go, okay, well, I've got an 18 against their dodge. Well, what did you roll on the dice? Oh shit, I don't remember what I rolled on the die. I've got an 18, right? Because we get used to coming up with a total, taking the bonus, adding the skill, come up with a total, and then saying that, okay, so what is your that against your dodge? And then, oh, that's right. Well, Jean-Luc is in melee with the Gospog, so now we got to figure out whether we hit the Gospog or Jean-Luc. And well, what did you roll on the die? Oh, I don't know. I mean, roll 20, you can scroll up and you can see what you rolled. At the table, you may have already scooped up your dice, put them back in your cup or whatever, and you're in your corral, and you have no idea what you rolled. Nobody remembers. Nobody else looked at it because they're not auditing your rolls. And so the way we handle it, or the way I handle it, and some other organized play GMs handle it the same way, is to look at, okay, you're firing into melee. Do you like high or low? And so I let the player, the Storm Knight, decide whether high is good for them or low is good for them. And when they settle on one or the other, I'll roll a d20, and if I roll in the range that they've chosen is good for them, then they're on target and they're not shooting their buddy. But if it isn't, now I have a chance of hitting somebody else. So now I have to look at how many guys are in this combat, how many people are in the combat total, and then randomize which one of those. In my head, I just come up with a number. There's like six threats in the combat. 2 of them are Storm Knights, so 1 and 2 are the Storm Knights, and that's this one and that one because they are left to right on my screen and roll 20. That's number 1, that's number 2, and anything else is a bad guy, and you roll the randomizer, and then you can still hit what you wanted to hit, even though you're like, oh no, and then now we go back to the Storm Knight putting in a total, or deciding whether or not they want to pile possibilities on that initial die roll, or what do they want to do to make it better, or I'm hitting my compatriot. I don't want to jack this up high because then Jean-Luc gets his head blown into next week. That's right. Yeah, I'm going to be relentless and put a coup de grace in here. 6 BD done. So yeah, that's how I approach it. Because it's easy. It gets the player gets a little agency. I mean, not really, but they control their own fate by choosing which one, high or low, is good for them. You could set it always low or always high. It doesn't matter, and everybody know. If that's the way you want to do it, that's the way you do it. But I think players like it when they get to make choices.
Jay, how do you handle fire?
I think we went over this in one of the house rule episodes, but
probably
we might have.
I do 2. Well, I guess 3 things. One, which is a commonly seen house rule that a lot of groups do, I think, is that if you use aim, you ignore that because it makes aim good for something, for taking an entire round. But then it makes that bell spectrum, the bell snipe, even better. So it's kind of, you got to be careful with that. I use the size categories. So like if there's one Storm Knight fighting 2 large creatures, it'll be between like 1 and 5, and on a 1 it hits the Storm Knight. 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 just re-roll on a d6. So that way there's a better chance of hitting larger creatures. And then the biggest thing is I don't use the die roll result, I use the total result. Because that gives people the ability to play those +3 action cards and supporter cards from their hands to change those. So they can make an odd roll into even, and sort of save themselves if they really don't want to deal with that. But otherwise, yeah, it's pretty much the same.
So yeah, I do it similar to Jay, where I have the aim, not you hit what you're aiming at, and because it's supposed to be cinematic, I don't require my player to specify who they're aiming at. They just are aiming, and then who they shoot, that's who they were aiming at, because if that threat was taken out, they have wasted a whole turn for that, for the whole turn, unless they have that bell snipe thing. And I will say in my first Torg Eternity group, I had 2 ranged characters, and one would always aim and the other one did not care. Would just shoot whatever. If I hit a friend, I hit a friend. If not, I don't.
Putting out twice as many shots, right?
Right. And then in the other group, they all tend to use the aim when possible. So that...
Sorry, I had to blow my nose. Didn't think you wanted that on camera.
Oh, that's fine. I just looked and was like, well, as long as
he's gone.
The things don't get messed up, it's fine.
No.
So, that's kind of how I guess you could say the three of us do it, because it can be a problem when 50% of the time your Storm Knights have a chance of getting hit. I also use the size category like Jay, that if something is very large, then I allow that to count as 2 targets and expand it outward. Or if there's like 3, say 3 Edenos in a group that's fighting one person, then all of them, basically whoever is around the target on a battle
Oh yeah,
map
I do that. I like the large category. I hadn't thought about the large counting as multiples of whatever. That's a good idea. If I'm smart enough to remember to do that next time, I'll try. You feel free to pipe up next time we're doing that.
Okay. So I tend to do that as well. The other one I guess I wanted to talk about is there's 2 similar sounding rules. The one that we just went over is firing into melee, and then there is firing in melee.
Right.
Which is if you have a pistol or a firearm with a carbine property and you are inside of melee. So firing into melee means you have to be outside of melee shooting at people fighting. The firing in melee is you are in melee, and that's where the dodge is not used as a defense. So if you're using, say, a pistol in close combat and you shoot somebody, then they will get to use their unarmed combat or their melee weapons as a defense, as they're able to try to bat away the weapon before they get shot. So that just remember that those rules sound very similar, but they are completely different. And the firing into melee doesn't apply to when you are already in melee. So you don't have to worry about the shooting allies because you're
But if
closer.
you're in melee and there are other people in melee with, let's say you've got a large target and you've got multiple Storm Knights engaging the one large target and you're getting ready to use your Glock 19 shooting in melee, can you hit your compatriots?
If you're in melee, no. If there was a group over there and you were here in this fight and there's another separate kind of melee going on simultaneously, then that would be firing into combat. But if you're out of combat, you're not firing into combat.
No. I'm in melee with a large target.
Yes.
Let's say all 3 of us are Storm Knights playing at a table, and we're all 3 fighting against, a Boraka.
Right.
And so
luck.
good luck. I pull out my Glock 19 and I want to shoot that Boraka, but you guys are also engaged in melee with it. Do I have the risk of hitting you?
But by raw, no. By official, no.
Because it's not targeting its dodge. It's
right.
Okay.
Because you're putting it. I think that a better term than firing in melee would be point blank firing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's probably yeah.
To ease some confusion.
Right.
So that way because you're not targeting their dodge in this specific case, you don't have to worry about accidentally hitting somebody else.
Yes, and as it might be on the FAQ, one of the clarifications that came after Torg Eternity was released that spells, miracles, and psionic powers that target dodge also have the firing into melee rules. So if you try to cast a lightning bolt at somebody in melee and you roll your odd number, then that has a chance. It doesn't mean you're going to hit your ally, but you might end up hitting your target because it's a random thing at that point. But basically, as Jay said, if it targets dodge or dex and you're outside of a melee, firing into a melee, that rule
Casting into melee.
or casting.
But if it's a
Manifesting.
willpower, will spirit, it's not. You don't, even though you're targeting an individual,
right,
targeting their will spirit, that doesn't have a chance of hitting your ally.
correct. So it is only dodge dex. So that's if you need the clear cut, here is the line on one side.
No.
It's this on the other side.
You said
this,
that dodge dex. Yep.
Yep. So that's kind of how that goes. So hopefully that explained in all your questions, and then
Do you want to bring up small blasts?
I already did a targeting. I did a whole targeting episode.
never
So
mind.
if you
All right.
have questions about how blasts are technically not effects, they're a targeting mechanism, you can look at that brief Delphi Council debriefing that I have a few episodes ago that I go
I must
into
have missed
that.
that one.
So yes, go check that one out.
I have homework.
Okay, so let's move into our last question for this episode. So it says, hello, I would very much like an episode discussing equipment, resources, etc. For example, a review on how requisitioning works would be great, but also I'd like to hear how folks deal with other parts of the topic in their games. Torg Eternity never stuck me as a game that encouraged looting your enemy. That's not very cinematic. But then how do you deal with them earning/finding cash? Do GMs make players track cash from each cosm that they could only be spent in that cosm? Is basic gear just abstracted through the requisition system and the dollar amounts listed, or just for people who take perks that give them the cash to spend? If the heroes find an eternity shard or other sort of unique or magical resource on a mission, do they keep it, or are they expected to add it to the Delphi Council's resources? Can cyberware be stripped out of an opponent installed on a PC in other people's games? There's probably a dozen other questions, but you get the idea of the topic I would love to hear discussed from Jeff. So thank you for that email. So we'll dig into this. I will give the official answers. So the official stuff is in the core rules, page 138 and 139, which deals with both the Delphi Council requests and personal resources. So in here, the Delphi Council request is each item, equipment, gear has a value that's next to the monetary value, and on that price value, not the monetary number, but the price value, you need to roll a persuasion roll, and if you use that as a difficulty number, and if you are successful, you gain the equipment for that act or that mission however long the game master determines, but that thing will go back to the Delphi Council. It does also say that the Delphi Council, previous to that on page 138, it basically says the Delphi Council will provide you for the basics. So you're going to not have to worry about food, lodging, ammo. I mean, you might if things get stressful in an actual mission, and that's part of the mission. But for most of the things, the Delphi Council is going to provide for you. I would say even basic stuff they would give you for free, like the different kits, adventure kits or boxes, cargo boxes. From the different realms, they'd probably at least give one out, if not one to each of the Storm Knights. Equipment availability on page 139 also. Game Masters look at it. There's modifiers that you can use that would increase that DN or either increase or decrease the DN depending on if there's a lot of it or if it's rare or unique. You can also take what realms are into account. So if you're far away from Isle, you probably aren't going to be requisitioning some Isle magic item unless it's super high. It lets you roll super high and they have it, and as a game master you can always say nope, it just isn't available. So then they also talk about personal resources in the Torg Eternity core rules on page 139, and that is a streetwise, and it specifically says here that you roll your streetwise against the total value of the purchase, and you can use those same modifiers that I just talked about. And then if you are successful, you find what you're looking for and you have the funds to afford it. If not, you can't find what you need, you don't have the funds or some other thing. And the last couple of things I wanted to mention is that the Eternity Shards, those are supposed to go back to the Delphi Council. That's one of the things where, as a kind of out of character game master to table promise, because players do not like handing somebody a powerful item, because in their mind, after playing so many other games, they will get betrayed and that item will be used against them. So there's kind of a GM player contract as a, if you give this back to the Delphi Council will never betray you. So there's that aspect in it as well. And then the last part would be for the actual money values, that is kind of character creation or gaining perks, whether that's the $1,000 or $10,000 if you're wealthy that you start with, or you gain the cyberware perk and you have $10,000 to spend. That's where the actual monetary number comes into play after getting those perks. And when things go elsewhere, then that's only going to be the requisition or streetwise, and then it would apply to both or all three cyberware, gene mods, and occult tech. There are in-game reasons why characters can't just take those from fallen enemies or bust into a gene mod lab and just start injecting themselves or whatever with gene mods, which is for the cyber papacy. That perk is also cleansing it of, or getting rid of all the little things that connect to the godnet and let the cyber papacy know where you are and what you're doing, and all the spyware. Basically it cuts out all the malware from the cyberware, and that's where the perk comes in. So in the game, you could theoretically buy it, take it, whatever, but as soon as you put it on, if you haven't got it through a perk, it's going to be telling the cyber papacy everything. And in the official material, the Delphi Council will not let you be a Storm Knight of the Delphi Council if you're doing stuff. Now, I could see a mission where they're like, hey, put this on because we want to backstab the cyber papacy or make them think that they know what's going on, but we're going to, but that would be a plot. And in general, the Delphi Council is not going to allow that. With the occult tech, it's supposed to take away a lot of the demonic magic that impacts adversely to humans who wear it, or even the aspirants who are trying to be good. That evil stuff will mess around with it. So the perk is kind of cleansing it of the evil demonic magic. And then with the gene mods, it's specifically to get around the EULAs for the so-called second gen. If you stop paying your subscription, well, then the Gmod no longer works, and sometimes, depending on how many you have, that could very severely affect you. So if you want to think of it, the Delphi Council promotes piracy because the perk allows you to get the hacked version of the Gmod that will not stop working whenever. So that's kind of the official things on how Torg Eternity set up. I know I have my own way of doing things. I know Torganized Play does a little way, but let's go to Jay first. How do you handle resources?
I handle things pretty much by the book, but you do have to, I guess, go at it from the understanding that money and loot isn't the goal of the game. Now, you can actually run Torg any way you want. You could be a group of people just trying to survive in the blasted lands, and resources are important, that sort of thing. But the game, as default, is groups of Storm Knights being sent by the Delphi Council to do missions. And they might have their own personal things going on in between, but it's very mission-based. You can play open world style games, or you could be a bunch of cyber gangers looting people, kidnapping, and then taking people's arms to the cyber leggers to remove them. It's possible, but the base game money is doesn't really matter, which is why it's been abstracted to be these requisition roles instead of keeping track of the cash. So no, we're not keeping track of how much cash you have usually, especially from realm to realm. I know in classic Torg there was conversion charts for how many Eilish crowns or trades or whatever they were versus Victorian pounds and like all this stuff. And there's a part of me that enjoys that kind of idea. I will say, like, the games that I played the most before Torg were things like Hackmaster and Cyberpunk, so they're very much on the loot goblin side of things. But when I run Torg, it's different. You are assumed, as an agent for the Delphi Council, to have enough money to get by. You have a home, you have probably a vehicle or something. You have enough for you. You may not be at home. You might be living somewhere else, like a safe house or some kind of barracks or something right now. You might be on an aircraft carrier. Who knows? But you're generally provided for. And if you have the wealthy perk, then you've got a good home. And it's probably rarely going to come up unless the GM runs something during your birthday party or, something like that. But the amount of money doesn't really come up too much between the adventures. And then when you get your mission briefing from the Delphi Council, it's assumed that the Delphi Council gives you what you need to do the mission in the first place. So as Lehman says, I usually give everybody a Delphi survival kit appropriate to the Cosm, or make one up for certain Cosms that didn't get them for some reason. And that assumed to have, if anyone can drive, there will be a vehicle. They might even get a vehicle with a driver if they need it, and any mission critical gear. I assume they have ammunition for their weapons. It never really comes out and says how much, but considering every archetype comes with 3 reloads, that's what I've always gone with. Everybody gets 3 reloads for their weapons. But then the requisitions are for extras, things that the mission leader didn't figure you needed, and maybe you're just going up to a supply sergeant and trying to sweet talk them, or something. Like, officially you're not really supposed to get this, but they know you could use it, and they know you are trying to save the world, so they are working with you, but you do have to persuade them. So I would refer to keep it separate. There's Delphi requisitions, and then there's streetwise requisitions, or personal requisitions, which I would sometimes call it. So for the Delphi requisitions, you go and you sweet talk somebody, and you say, hey, look, we're really going to need it for this mission. Roll persuasion to see if you can get across to them how important it is. If you meet or exceed the difficulty, you get it. Now, for certain things like grenades that are consumables that you would actually probably want more than one of, I usually let them do, like, for every 2 that they succeed by, they get another one. Something like that. Unless to like a max of 3. I don't let them glory on a requisition roll to get like 100 grenades. But I believe it does say in the book that even if you fail the roll, they will still give you something. And it may not be as good as the thing you wanted. Like, you may have been asking for a... I just forgot what they're called. The Tharcold healing thing.
The slap patch.
Yeah, you may have asked for slap patches, but they don't have any slap patches, so they give you a regular first aid kit. Okay, it's all we've got. There's a war on, that's like you aren't the only team, so that's why you have to make these requests. They're spread thin. And then if you're in beta clearance, you actually get additional ones. Oh yeah, that was the thing I was going to mention. Each character gets 1 requisition. So you can have one player who's like the face character go for the hard stuff if you want, or you can go for easier things. So it depends on the group. Some groups, no one is able to persuade anyone of anything, and it's almost a lost cause. Some, there's like someone with the arms dealer perk, and they just come out with like an armory. You never know. But if you're a
Bag of
beta
guns.
character, you can either make 2 requisition rolls
Hmm.
or one with a +1. And you get a discretionary +5 to throw on one person's requisition because you're such important groups. So that is something I see a lot of people forget about with their
Hmm.
beta characters. Um, now, when you move on to the streetwise requisition, I always handle that in game, and this is sort of more from my cyberpunk background. It's not just roll a streetwise, you find it. Usually I will require a mind streetwise to find someone who can sell this. They have to either, call around or check the plexus or whatever, find someone who has this kind of kind of stuff, encounter them, and then they will make their streetwise roll like normal to see if they can get it. And usually the way I'll do it, I'll be a lot more restrictive with the modifiers here. The Delphi Council wants to give you stuff. These guys want your money. It's a different story. So if it's something illegal or if it's military grade, it's going to be much harder to find on the black market, or at the very least, it's going to cost you more. And then if you fail the roll by like 5 or so, I will often add on a contingency like, okay, we can get you this, but we need you to do us a little job first, right? So it adds a little bit more. I like to have a bit more role play with those, and it can make things go a bit longer, but I like to do a bit more there. But I believe officially you get one um, Delphi requisition or one streetwise requisition, right? Or is it and? I can't remember just offhand right now.
I think it's or.
Or yeah, so you want to kind of choose your battle. Often it's whether you took streetwise or persuasion. But I will also, if the moment calls for it, I will allow additional streetwise rolls out in the world if things
Hmm.
happen. If maybe you get chummy with a bunch of Kanawa security that you're helping them brace against the Jiangxi like horde, you might be able to requisition some more gear from them if you're able to sweet talk them, stuff like that. And then, of course, there's the Delphi cards. You could just find stuff. So there's a lot. I don't like to limit it to just at the beginning of the adventure. I'm willing to look at it, but I don't also want it to just turn into loot all the guys, carry everything. You don't want them just like running around with a wagon full of Viking long swords,
Hmm.
to try and sell. That's not going to get them very far. Likewise, with the higher tech stuff, I think that's one of the reasons that the church police guns have a tendency to, they only register for whoever is assigned to it.
Hmm.
They pray at you and basically deep six your piety score if you try to use them. And same thing with Thargold, like the guns won't necessarily work for you unless it's something simple like a Thav 9. So I try to stop the looting as much as possible. And sometimes it's just telling your players it's not that kind of game. All this is going to do is slow you down, and no one's going to care that you pulled a bunch of chainmail off of a bunch of dead Vikings. It's
Hmm.
not really going to help unless you want to make that the focus of your campaign.
So, Mark, your thoughts on both requisitions and the general personal
So
buying, purchases, I guess you could say.
we run a lot of Torganized play, and Torganized play does it a little bit differently because we've got some game playability issues that we want to keep, consistent from table to table, but we've also got time constraints that a home game doesn't have. So typically, we will let the player have a persuasion or a streetwise at the beginning, and we limit it to what you can buy based on the cosms that the mission goes to. Um, it's almost always core earth and something else. So if your mission is set in Isle, then you can purchase. You can either requisition or purchase from core earth or Isle items. You can't. There's no in. We've just drawn the line and said, well, you can't come up with a reason why Tharkold stuff would be here. So it gives a reason to go play certain missions because you want, let's say you want Iramesh, then well, you have to go do a Pan Pacifica mission to get Iramesh. Um, or gain access. Sometimes if you have, because the rule of two is a thing, right? If you have Pan-Pacific Kanwa troops equipped with Iramesh show up in an Eilish mission, then the log at the end might say that you get access to it, and then you can purchase it or whatever. So it's a little different from organized play, but we do it a lot like Jay's setup is. The persuasion is convincing the quartermaster that you need this to make your mission successful. The streetwise, we kind of hand wave. I completely agree with the way Jay approaches it for a home game, in that this ought to not be just a what do you want to buy? Make me a roll, you get it or you don't. But because organized play has a time constraint, that's kind of how we handle it. But you can still, it's got to be something you could find on the street during the mission, and so the game master knows the cosms that you're visiting in that mission, and without letting out, without spoilers, because maybe you don't know that you're going to Darkhold and you're going to be in Kerr. The mission blurb kind of says you're going to Isle, and well, all of a sudden you're in Darkhold, and so the game master is not going to tell you up front you can do your requisitions from Isle, Core Earth, or Darkhold, because you're like, wait a minute, this is an Isle-ish mission. So you may just get Isle and Core Earth, and then in the middle of the mission you're like, oh look, we're in Darkhold. So we do it just that differently in the way that money is a little different from organized play as well, because we had a conversation at the very beginning, in that we were, because it's not a loot oriented game, and there's not amassing personal wealth, but there is dollar figures in the books, and we're not going to let people start off with all this gear and just open access to pick up whatever they want. We had to come up with something. So in an alpha mission, you get a set dollar amount. In a beta mission, you get a set dollar amount, and you amass it. And then when you make your streetwise, if you want to, you found the item, if you want to buy it, you have to pay the money, and then you can keep it. And that goes for ammunition like hollow points or other special ammunition, regular bullets and things like that you have to buy. Under, I think it's 10, a value of 10, you just buy. Right, you have open access. You don't have to make a roll. You just, if it's 10 or less, you just buy it, and you check off the money, and you have it. But for things that are higher than that, you have to make a streetwise. And if you don't make your streetwise roll, you haven't found a vendor who has it in stock for you to buy that mission, which it manages gameplay and keeps game balance going. So the dollar figures, in that event, it isn't pesos and dollars and gold coins and loonies and lira and all the rest of it. It's a unit, right? And it's a 1-to-1. So when you go from Core Earth with a US dollar and you travel to Isle, the power of the axiom and whatnot, the axiom washing the world laws, transforms your dollar into a gold coin, or whatever the unit is that's used for that currency. The pound when you go to Aurora, whatever. And so you still have 1-to-1 whatever you had on your character sheet when you go to these other cosms. We just hand wave that because it gets, classic Torg did do that super conversion, and if you wanted to manage that, you certainly could, but that just takes away and takes too much time, and so we don't do that. But because the game is not a loot oriented game, and you are a troop essentially working for the Delphi Council, going on missions that they assign you, when you work from the U.S. military standpoint, they don't make soldiers buy their own bullets to go into battle. They don't make them buy their own night vision goggles. They don't make them buy their own rubber Zodiac boats to go in and out. So if your mission calls for it, the Delphi Council should be supplying that to you from a home game standpoint. And so that's a kind of a hand wave. In organized play, it's written into whatever the mission is. You get what you get. And if you think you need something, like I am notorious for, I always want law rockets. Everywhere we go, I want law rockets, or I want a machine gun. I want a Marmot M60. Well, if I can't roll high enough, I don't get my law rockets. I may not even need them. I still try, because sometimes you're just like, well, what am I going to try for? You always want to blow stuff up. Sometimes the quartermaster says, you know what? You're going into downtown Tokyo we're not going to be responsible for what you do with a law rocket in a populous area. So no, you can't have law rockets. And GMs, it's perfectly okay for your quartermaster to tell people, no, we're not going to give you 3 pounds of C4 because we don't trust you with that. And because you know things about the mission and you're like, I don't want to deal with my players running around setting off demolition charges everywhere. Okay, fine. You don't have any. As Jay pointed out, limited resources. You're not the only group. There's a whole bunch of other people fighting the war. We need to supply them. So, yeah. But Eternity Shards presents a unique Torg situation because that's kind of the magic items, like D&D magic items of Torg Eternity is the Eternity Shard, and that's really what the Delphi Council's after, right? You're fighting the possibility war, and we need these items that are charged with possibility energy, and that Eternity Shards, for whatever reason, happen to be those unique items that have amassed this power. And in the same sense that you're going on these missions for the Delphi Council that has the higher authority and sees the big picture. They know where that item is needed best. Just because you found it doesn't mean you get to keep it. And so when you return back to base and they say, "Oh, look at the neat MacGuffin I found," they may determine that there is a group over here that needs that more than you, and they don't confiscate it, but it's not yours just because you found it. With organized play handles that a little differently as well, in that if your Storm Knight is on a mission that found or recovered an Eternity Shard, you now have access to that shard, and so you can go request it because they know, the Delphi Council knows that understand the impact that item has because you found it, and so you have access to that. Whereas a Storm Knight that was not on that mission or did not successfully recover that shard, they can't even ask for it because it isn't on one of their logs. So that's kind of a nice, it makes it unique for each player. You can go and request it, you get it, you can hand it to somebody on that mission, but then you give it back to the Delphi Council, so it's just something you request and go back. But as far as other GMs and game masters on how they want to do it, your Delphi Council doesn't have to be like that if you don't want them to be. You don't even have to have your Storm Knights working for the Delphi Council. In Rod's home game, we don't work for the Delphi, or we didn't when we were playing it. We didn't work for the Delphi Council. We worked for another group that was trying to prosecute the war as well, kind of like, Blackwater or whatever, a group of contractors that picked up work from the Delphi Council, but we did our own thing. And so, but they operated very similar to that in the same dynamic. They just weren't the Delphi Council. So if you want to, as Jay said, if you want to have them running around snatching stuff out of people and piling up loot because it's an important commodity, and as a game master you want to run the blasted land post-apocalyptic marketplace and keep track of all of this and where you can go and what you can do, and they amass a fortune, sure, do it. You can absolutely do that. Your Delphi Council wants to let the teams collect what they collect and keep it. Okay, knock yourself out. It's your cosm first. You run it the way you want to. I would say that the only thing that you're going to run into problems with, and this is, I think Liam had touched on this, is cyberware and occult tech, where you're just going to have people start picking on folks that, like, oh, look, they've got a piece of gear that I want. Let's go mug them and rip their eye out because I need that. And EULA, whatever, end user license agreement thing with gene mods and all of that is, I treat cyberware the same way, in that it's tuned to the genetic code of the person that they're installing it. And so you've got so many little synapses and connections. It's not really geared for, you can't just take it out of Bobby and put it into Janet, because that's not how it works. You got to go find somebody to tune it properly, to clean it up, to take out the sanctions stuff, so the cyber pope doesn't know everything you're doing, or the demon who had it before is starting to corrupt your soul. You have to have that. That's not something you can just, oh, look, I got an arm, let me cut my arm off and put this on. Okay, now I got a cyber arm, look at that, that's cool. That's not how it works. So yeah, it's not just a loot this and then go. That becomes, you can make that into an entire side quest all of its own if you wanted to do that.
Okay, so my version is, my game doesn't have the Delphi Council. They don't exist, period. So my group is formed of a loose band of Storm Knight groups known as the Circle of Knights. Each is a Storm Knight group that was a previous classic Torg Storm Knight group. So it's kind of a legacy characters that they those original groups became like the leader groups, and then they get sent on missions. My first couple adventures are always they're not part of any group. They're just a Storm Knight group who starts working together, and then they're approached by the Circle of Knights, and then they have the choice, yes or no. So far, all my groups have said yes, but if they said no, then they would be on their own. What I do is, since the groups are not as well organized and do not have big governments and money people backing them, there's no requisitions. So they have to buy everything, and I put that in air quotes because I use a similar thing as requisitions. So, but I break it up more into cosms. So generally, a requisition for something that you would be able to go to your realities version of Walmart or Target and buy is a persuasion. If it gets on the black market type thing, then you need a streetwise. If you're out in the blasted lands, then I require an intimidation. And I use other skills, depending on what you're trying to get and where you are. I don't have the list in front of me, but I use various skills for stuff like that. Like cyber papacy, I'd probably have computers or something, because you're having to hack into something to figure it out. But because they're doing that, they keep all the stuff that they get. And my players really go for the "we are heroes" for the most part. So if they loot a body, it's because that person has a cool sword. I don't. I need a sword, and then they just use it. Kind of like in movies where somebody will grab their opponent's weapon, use it for that scene or that episode, and then it never appears again. So that type of thing happens. With Eternity Shards, what I did in Classic is a lot of times the group would have to spend time to figure out what the Eternity Shard even did. So that's why they would ship it back to the home Knights, the Knights of the Hearth, because those were the ones who were like the reality scholars trying to figure out what all the Eternity Shards did, and once they figured it out, then the party would get it back type thing. Currently, each of the groups has maybe one or two Eternity Shards, and the other ones they've handed over. So and anything that's back at the base, any group, because I do multiple groups, any group can pick it up and use it. So there's kind of sharing between groups and stuff like that. I also do where was your last mission and where is your current mission, and those are the two realms that I allow purchases from. So if your last adventure was in Tharkold and your next one's in Core Earth, those are the two realities that you get to go for when we do kind of downtime. Otherwise, sometimes during acts, there's easy places that equipment and stuff can be found, especially if it's the common stuff. Even though the game, for the most part, has requisitions at the beginning of each act, sometimes the act kind of is a continuance and there's not a good stop. So I always suggest for game masters to not force a requisition at the beginning of every act. Sometimes it's like you just let your players know, hey, it doesn't make sense, but don't worry, sometime during this act, you'll find a place that you can do your requisitions. I do use the modifiers for things. If I think something's going to be rare, I use those, but that's kind of how I work it, because I don't have the Delphi Council, but going from Classic Torg to Torg Eternity, I did like the let's not worry about the cache, which is funny because I really like that. Like, I can look at 25-year-old character sheets and see like a cash list from all the realms, like this many yens, this many, royals, this many crowns, etc. And that was something that I was very into for classic Torg, but for Torg Eternity, I do like the more generic, wishy-washy type thing. It fits the movie type thing, and that's what I try to go for. Is the, if you need to loot that guy for this one specific thing, fine. If it's good for the group to carry around, then yes. If not, you just get rid of it or you pass it along, like that. So that's kind of what I do. Is there any further thoughts for any that we had today before we wrap up, Jay?
First thing is I did double check in both the core book and the beta player primer. Mm-hmm. You do get your Delphi requisition and a streetwise requisition for each character. Beyond that, something that I started doing, and I believe Torganized Play basically does this as well, in a slightly different way. I took it from the Chronicles of Darkness had a system with money similar to this, where it's been abstracted. You don't keep track of your cash; you just have a resources value. So I kind of look at anything that is 2 below your persuasion. You can, or your streetwise, you can pretty much just get like on your day-to-day. And then the requisition roll is for something like that would be a big expenditure. Mm-hmm. But for cheaper stuff, you could go buy toothpaste. It's not a problem, right? You could take a cab, that sort of stuff. It's not worth fretting about. So that would also be modified by wealthy, things like that too.
Yeah, and speaking of that, in my system, I do allow the wealthy to work for any of those because I didn't want to make that perk worse by saying, oh, it only works for your persuasion. So when I'm forcing you to use intimidation, I'm not going to let you do that. No, it just...
I see what you mean, yeah.
You have the money. That could be a part of intimidation.
Yeah.
It's like, I owe
got all
you!
that bling on.
Right. You look like somebody who has stuff, so... that's what I once you said that, I was like, I did want to interject there. So, Mark, any final thoughts for you for any of the topics we've talked about?
No.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and wrap that up. We do thank you again for listening and or watching the Delphi Council debriefings. Remember, you can write us and we'll read your emails on a future episode, as well as answer your questions to the best of our capabilities at torgdcd@gmail.com. And until next time, we hope you have fun in your Cosmverse. Bye.